This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me, you're not a stranger, you'll always be.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicoast. Today is August 21st, 2025. I'm Scott Bohm, and on today's show, I'm going to be speaking with the three leadership candidates for the BC Green Party. But first, you can support the show and get access to our patron Slack, where you can put your question in for future interviewees by supporting the show at patreon.com/Politicoast. On to the interviews. Joining me today is Green Party leadership candidate Emily Lowan. Emily, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, glad you could come on and talk about your run for leader. So why don't we start off by just having you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Victoria, and I've been a climate organizer and Indigenous rights organizer and researcher for the past decade. So my entire focus has been building power and building movements and broad coalitions. So I worked at Climate Action Network Canada most recently. I'm sadly on leave while I campaign. And I led national climate organizations on the federal oil and gas emissions cap regulation, as well as provincial coalitions to stop the expansion of liquefied natural gas production. So I've had extensive experience across grassroots levels, as well as higher levels of organizations with labor, Indigenous nations, and many other groups in civil society. And I think that's really what the Greens need in this moment. So I'm so thrilled to be back to the party to offer this decade of movement building experience. And yeah, it's a really exciting time to rebuild the party.
So you've never held elected office before. This is your first kind of big run. Why start here? Why not run locally in City of Victoria municipally, or seek a seat as an MLA first to, get some political experience and stuff? Why jump right to party leader?
Yeah, these are not normal times. I'm a young person, and over the past 8 years of this government, every major issue has gotten worse. We've seen a so-called progressive government approve major pipelines again and again. The life expectancy is falling. Cost of living is spiraling out of control. And I can't sit on the sidelines anymore. And I am watching the Greens and their dwindling base, and they're, in my view, fading into the background. And I think this is a crucial moment for the party to rebuild that base. And over the last month of my campaign, that's precisely what I've done. We've brought in 3,700 new members to the party, and we've increased the number of youth members under 30 by 11-fold. So we're seeing really exciting traction and just a complete hunger and desperation for a bold party leader that will have an exciting political home and vehicle for the many people across this province that are disaffected by the status quo. So it wasn't on my 2025 bingo card. I really am so passionate about the work that I do at Climate Action Network Canada, but it didn't feel like I had a choice. I asked a lot of other people to do this run. I lobbied my smartest friends and movement organizers who I think could make a real difference in the party, but it did get a lot of fingers pointing back at me. So here we are. I fully acknowledge that I'm not a traditional political candidate, but I think I'm exactly what this moment calls for.
Well, what has been like the surprise of actually having to be in the big seat running a campaign? Like, it's one thing to, worked for various organizations on public facing campaigns, but what have you learned just doing this?
Um, yeah, it's certainly a strange experience to have your face plastered around town. My volunteer team was uh, really gung ho about putting posters of my face all around Victoria and Vancouver, and so it is definitely strange to be recognized. But I'm trying to compartmentalize and treat this in a sense as the movement building and power building campaign that it needs to be. And so, yeah, I think I can sort of separate my face and then what this campaign actually means, and the many people that believe in its message and mission.
Hey, on that note, what do you see as the role for the Green Party in BC?
I think this party needs to revive its base. I we do see definitely a strong but dwindling base. Like the numbers have not moved. We see the same lovely people showing up to the same events in the same riding associations year after year. And what I've been hearing from those folks in the party is they need young people. And we've seen that trajectory for for most green parties around the world. They've seen uh, success. They've come out as a bold party and have been able to regain their traction through youth membership, through people under the age of 40, rebuilding the party from the grassroots up, to really give it that sense of passion and purpose. Um, yeah, so I think it's a crucial time for the party to regain that relationship with climate and social movements, young people, workers, and renters, um, and to really move in lockstep with those movements. I think it's something that the BC NDP actually did very well at one point in time, and is a real reason for their success. Is at one time they did have this strong, thriving base of young people and disaffected people across this province, where they really represented, their values of working people. And so I think if the Greens are able to do that, which right now, yeah, they don't have those deep relationships and they don't have that energy. I think it would be a massive point of power and leverage for the party. So essentially, I want to channel the power of working people into this province and to be a bold thorn in the side of the governing party. I think we need to truly stake out our position and to not be the NDP's lapdog. I think that's going to give us the new leverage that we need. And yeah, that's not to say that we don't need to have a productive working relationship. I think we can have all of that, but I don't see us gaining traction and coming into our own as a party if we continue to rely on a dwindling membership base.
You mentioned power several times in there, and you also mentioned being a thorn in the side of the NDP in there. What do you see the ultimate goal of the Green Party to be? Is it to take power, form a government, and be the ones actually making the decisions, or is it to more be, as the NDP often like to consider themselves federally, the conscience of the legislature on that, and be more of an issues based party that maybe not as concerned about winning, but also not having to make the compromises needed to win?
Yeah, in many ways, I think it's a huge strength of the Greens that we're able to be bold and unrelenting in our vision, and I think that's actually crucial to rebuild our power. And we haven't had the capacity to do the level of coalition building that I have my sights set on. And so I think that's step one. And as at least initially an unelected leader, I would be laser focused on getting ready for the next election building power with these new bases and new coalitions. And I think ultimately, under first past the post, it's hard to imagine uh, a, a transformation in, say, the next election. But I do think that the Greens can grow the number of seats that they're winning. We can, I honestly, even under first past the post, I can see us winning 5 seats or more. I can see us holding the balance of power. We're in a razor thin majority government with 1 seat away, and so I think we can easily regain the balance of power, which is an extremely important position for the Greens to leverage these new bases, to ensure that, yeah, we're fighting for as ambitious demands as possible. And in the long view, like, we do need to change to proportional representation, to mixed member system, or yeah, really, anything but first past the post, I think would be a great improvement for democracy in BC. And so, yeah, I think it would change our electoral prospects quite a lot. But yeah, in sort of the most realistic short term sense, I think we can increase the number of seats, our vote share, and when we do that, we can broker for and push for proportional representation.
Yeah, so how do you see like the balancing that politicians often need to do between like pragmatism and the need to like stick with core principles? There's almost always a trade-off if you're a party that gets more than like a small percentage of the vote and tries to build on that. What do you see, or how would you approach trying to make those judgment calls?
Yeah, I think for the Greens, I don't think centrism is our winning strategy. We know that the centrist voters belong to the party in power. That is fundamental to centrist psychology. And so I think our pathway to power is actually appealing and building, a movement and a base with people who do not benefit from the status quo. And so I think I'm 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 all for a big tent, but I think we need to be strategic about who is actually going to come over to the Greens, and yeah, who's going to be loyal to us as a party, through election cycles. And so right now we're seeing, we're seeing young people going over to the Conservatives. I think that's in part because this party hasn't spoken, with uh, like with a real working class appeal. We need to be clear about how we're showing up for young people and working people, renters in this province. And so, yeah, there's a huge swath of people who I think would really see themselves in the Greens if we stood up and fought for them in the way that I know I can as leader.
Hey, you mentioned proportional representation. Um, how do you reconcile the party's longstanding push for proportional representation with some recent polling out of Research Co. that suggests that about 65% of British Columbians are satisfied with first past the post, and there's been several referendums where it hasn't met the threshold to be enacted. Is there a tension in your mind between what the public and citizens are expressing when it comes to electoral reform and what the party wants to see done?
Yeah, I don't think the Greens have truly campaigned on proportional representation, and there's great organizations like Fair Vote Canada that do excellent work, but I I just really regret how the last referendum was communicated and how confusing and complex it was. It felt like just a a really an unfortunate, narrative that was built around proportional representation, and I think we're still trying to sort of undo that harm. And so, yeah, if elected, I would ensure that there are resources for the Greens to better communicate the opportunity of proportional representation to British Columbians.
Hey, so a couple of policy questions related to your platform and kind of some of the issues around being talked about both currently and over the past few years. Starting with, so the province has taken some steps to mandate cities allow more housing, upzoning in various areas around transit in particular. Do you support the province's efforts on that, and what would you do differently?
Yeah, I think what the province needs to be doing is providing far more funding for social, cooperative, and non-market housing in BC. Like, yeah, we all know that BC has the most expensive housing in Canada, and what I'm focusing on in my platform is social non-market housing as well as vacancy controls, which is a form of rent control that ties allowable rent increases to units rather than tenants. And it actually existed in BC from 1974 to 1983, but of course was destroyed by successive conservative social credit governments. And currently, landlords are incentivized to seek evictions to bypass rent controls that only apply to tenants rather than the units themselves. In my platform, I also talk about applying rent control to assisted living to protect seniors from rent increases and extra charges. So I think it's really crucial that we look at the bigger picture, and I think the Greens need to be a strong voice on corporate interests and developers that, in some cases, are pushing people out of what is currently affordable housing in order to build luxury high rises and unaffordable housing. And so I think broadly, we absolutely need to build more housing, and I support the efforts of the NDP government to make that more possible. But we're not seeing the funding. We're not seeing the scale of funding for non-market housing, and we need to ensure that we have enough safeguards in place to ensure that, yeah, we're not getting rid of truly affordable housing in yeah, through this process.
Okay. Do you support returning to the carbon tax in BC? And do you have views on the difference between consumer-facing one and an industrial one?
Yeah. So I do support a return to the carbon tax. And yeah, I would prioritize eliminating subsidies and imposing stronger regulations on BC's biggest polluters, including, yeah, industrial carbon pricing and emission caps. Right now, our OBPS system for industrial carbon pricing is quite weak. And I don't think, with the scale of the climate emergency, we can limit the tools at our disposal to transition away from fossil fuels as rapidly as possible. But it's also important to acknowledge that the urgency of the affordability crisis has, yeah, severely damaged trust in the government, and we've seen the consumer carbon tax. Obviously, it was weaponized to pit working people against decarbonization, and yeah, I think we need to continue advocating for consumer carbon taxes while uh, continuing to fight fossil fuel industry subsidies and to ensure that we have stronger regulations on the biggest polluters that are driving the crux of this crisis. So yeah, for instance, like we should eliminate the, you know, nearly 1 billion in subsidies to the fossil fuel industry, and yeah, that includes um, coming subsidies that I think will be far greater than that. For instance, with LNG Canada Phase One, industry received at least 6 billion in subsidies, and according to insiders, the government was effectively fleeced by industry in those negotiations. So the scale of public public taxpayer dollars that are going to these industries is pretty abhorrent, and an extreme misuse of public money. But yeah, essentially, I believe in prioritizing a climate justice based approach to climate and affordability crises, and ensure that we can realign working class economic interests with climate action and rebuild public trust in our government, that represents public good over corporate interests.
Somewhat related to that, noticed in your platform you were somewhat critical of bills 14 and 15. How do you consider the balance in interest in terms of needing to advance important projects? Bill 14 is specifically targeted at renewable energy and getting those sorts of projects through quicker. And, in a climate crisis, is there not a role for moving quickly on things like that, or big public transit projects and similar?
So, Bill 14 and 15 are deeply concerning from an Indigenous rights perspective. And I am not convinced that these bills are for the LNG industry, because what we saw literally 2 weeks after that was the fast-tracked approval of the Prince Rupert gas transmission pipeline. And so it's a really concerning precedent to set that I don't think actually reins in the power of the fossil fuel industry, the gas industry in BC. And yeah, it's I don't see how these bills are protecting the front lines of the climate crisis, the people that are most impacted. And I think it's just extremely neglectful when Indigenous leaders across the province were calling for consultation on these bills. Like they were asking for 2 months to have conversations, to revisit these bills in the fall so they could understand what it could mean. And they didn't get that. These projects were, or sorry, these bills were extremely rushed, and I think that's a terrible way to get the necessary buy-in and support from Indigenous leaders and the public generally. So I think I doubt the substance, and I'm highly critical of the substance of these bills, but the process was also egregious.
Okay, so like narrowing down on just 14 a little bit, just because it's a little more focused on there and has a more of a climate orientation on it than the general just provincially important projects that 15 was. Do you think the current way the province approves renewable energy projects is good? Is there room for improvement on that? What do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, we saw a coordinated wave of these fast tracking bills with Bill C5, Bill 14 and 15, and Bill 5 in Ontario. And it basically is removing a lot of the environmental safeguards and Indigenous rights protections. And so I think it's an extremely concerning precedent. Particularly, I mean, we're seeing oil and gas projects being fast tracked and pushed forward under either stripe of government. But I think, particularly, in really, and in either government, sort of under this Trojan horse of Trump, this claim that we need to expand oil and gas in order to protect our economic security, which is so deeply confused when the threat of Trump is momentary, years, and it's an immediate threat, but we're proposing projects that will take 5, 10, 15 years to build and will lock us into an ever growing supply of fossil fuels, which is damaging financially from a subsidy perspective, as well as in terms of our own trade and market share. So yeah, it's extremely concerning to see how these bills have been leveraged as projects in the so-called national interest, while steamrolling Indigenous rights in the process. And yeah, I did hear that both the BC and federal cabinets were tasked to read Ezra Klein's Abundance, or Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson's Abundance, which I think really misses the point. They effectively blame Rachel Carson for the environmental safeguards of the 70s, slowing down progress today. But I cast doubt on our ability to phase out fossil fuels simply by scaling up renewables. I think that's a false assumption, based on so many of the different markets and different industries that they are. I think we need to scale renewables 100%. I think we spend about 1/14 in public subsidies on renewables as we do fossil fuels, and so that balance needs to change, absolutely. And we need to have we know that so many Indigenous nations across the country want to be owners in renewable energy projects, and so to have those partnerships from the outset is really critical, for any nation that wants to be a part of renewable energy projects. But I think the way that these bills were handled is truly egregious, and just yet another way of steamrolling Indigenous rights, and centralizing control in the premier's and prime minister's office.
Have you read Abundance?
I have.
Okay. I also read it. I don't think that's an entirely accurate characterization of their view of the 70s environmental movement, but we are somewhat coming up on time here, so probably that's a can of worms.
It is a can of worms.
Be postponed to another conversation. I guess one final question, though, before I let you go, because we've already run a little long on this. If you were to get the leadership, you wouldn't have a seat in the legislature. Would you be seeking the first available by-election? Would you be asking one of the MLAs to step down so you could run?
It depends on the by-election. I think that would be a conversation we'd have with the party, and I'd certainly run in a general election. But my number one task as leader would to be preparing the party and these new constituencies, these new bases for the next election. And so as an organizer with a decade of experience doing exactly that, I'm excited by what how the Greens could increase their number of seats in the next election and become a bold voice in the legislature again.
Okay. Any final thoughts? And do you have a website or socials you'd like to let people know about so they can find out more?
Yeah. So we're just past the deadline to become a BC Green member, unfortunately, and it was amazing to see the flood of new members come into the party, and we're excited about my leadership. But if you want to read more of my platform, and phone bank, volunteer, even if you're not a member, you can still help out on the campaign. My website is emilyforbcgreens.ca. And thank you, Scott, for these excellent questions and for the conversation today.
Joining me tonight is Adam Bremner-Akins. Adam, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so why don't we get started, and you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running.
Yeah, so of course my name's Adam Bremner-Akins. People get the end of the name wrong all the time. It's all good. And I'm running to...
Oh, did I get that wrong?
No, you didn't actually. It's very rare. Okay. But I figured I'd mention it because it happens. Almost everyone gets it wrong. It's, long name, it happens.
Yeah, I have one of those last names too, so I get
it. We shortened it down to my initials to make it easier for everyone because I sort of gave up on the pronunciation being right. So But it's more fun than it's ABBA, and everyone loves ABBA. So, yeah, my name's Adam Bremner-Akins. I'm running for leader of the BC Green Party, and I'm running because I feel the urgency of issues in the province that aren't getting dealt with, and I want to address them. I think it's about as simple as that. As there are crises and issues I see myself facing, and I see people my age, people older than me facing, and it doesn't feel like the government's done enough, and I want to be the voice to change that. Um, and that's the gist of it. It's a pretty simple reason. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, you've never held elected office before. You've held a party position, but never public office.
Yeah.
Why go right for that? Why not get elected locally as a councillor or elected as an MLA and then work up to party leader?
Yeah, I think for me, when I was making the decision to run, the timing felt right in my life to go for this position, especially because I had just finished 4.5 years working within the party on its board. And the next direction felt like this, especially because there were people, no one had stepped up initially in the race, and I had been waiting on a few people who I wanted to support, and no one announced. So I figured, well, everyone who I was waiting to run was telling me to do it myself. And I figured, well, if they're saying to run and I feel it's what I need to do for myself to make sure that, the province is better and put my voice out there with my opinions and thoughts on it all, then let's do it. And yeah, I definitely wouldn't say that running as a counselor hasn't crossed my mind. And maybe that's a future pathway for me one day.
Okay, well, if you do become party leader, you're going to ask one of the MLAs to step down so you can run in a by-election, or are you going to be sitting outside the legislature for quite a while?
No, I'll be sitting outside the legislature. I want to make sure that both Rob and Jeremy feel secure in their ridings. It's their ridings. They've won those races, their communities. I don't want to go in and enter into their communities or remove them from the party in any way.
Okay. What role do you see for the Green Party in BC at this time? It's a bit of an uncertain time, and I think the Green Party, maybe particularly lately, hasn't necessarily always spoken to the moment as well as it could have. So what do you see as, like, in 2025, what the Green Party should be and needs to be?
Yeah, I think the Green Party is well positioned in this moment. The last election sort of felt like we were trying to push for a two-party system like the US, and the Greens feel the only thing preventing that from happening. And in a world where the NDP is running to chase the Conservatives down the spectrum and follow after all their policies, the Greens are going to be the only one talking about housing affordability or mental health or the building of our economy so that it can be green and strong and sustainable and not rely on fossil fuel markets and exports to China, for instance. And that's a world that BC Greens are going to fight for alongside traditional areas we fought for too, like healthcare and climate change, and arts and cultures, and just developing our society so we have an overall well-being in BC.
So one thing that has been a challenge for third parties, I think, is trying to figure out what their function is. It's pretty easy for, the BC NDP, the federal Liberals, to kind of know what they want to be. They basically want to win and govern, and they may have some ideas, but aren't as firmly ideologically planted as some other parties. But there's also the counterpoint to that is that if parties want to grow and become the party that actually makes the decisions, they sometimes have to maybe be a little more pragmatic, put some stuff to the side, focus on where the voters are. How do you see that tension and how to navigate that as the Green Party potential leadership?
Yeah, I think now is the time when people are looking for new ideas and directions in our society. It feels like we've hit a roadblock. The costs of everything keep going up. There's no hope for relief of that. And the future doesn't look particularly bright in BC. And I think we see that with the amount of people who are leaving the province. And now more than ever, I think the Greens' ideas and what the Greens have always been good at is developing very strong policy and new thoughts on how to organize our society. That's all with the party now. We have new ideas, whether it's healthcare or climate change or businesses, indigenous relationships. You name a policy area, and the Greens have strong and innovative policy for that. and communicating that new vision for the direction of our province, a vision where we focus on the well-being of people over GDP per capita, is a direction people, I believe, want to go in. It's a direction that I have heard a sentiment for on doorsteps during my MLA campaign. And it's sentiment I've heard within the party members is that this current system is not working, and the Greens have solutions for that, and that was displayed in our policy. And I believe now more than ever we need to be more effective in communicating our views on how the province should be, because it's quite different than the NDP or the Conservatives.
So, would it be fair to then say that you see the role as more of one of policy and idea development rather than electorally focused on gaining power and actually, being in the premier's chair to make those decisions?
I would say that me going into this as leader is going to mark a changing point in that the Greens are going to begin to focus on representation within the legislature. We have the policies now. We have the ideas. They've been developed, and they continue to develop through our policy committee and to the members. But as leader, my sole focus, not sole entirely focus, but my main focus will be growing the party's representation within the legislature.
And what do you think the best way to do that is?
I think the best way is for me as leader to go out into communities and to show people that the Greens are there, and to communicate our policies better, communicate our vision, our story. And as leader, I already announced that if elected leader, I'm going to be going to every riding in the province, whether we're big there or not as a party, because it's important that people know we're paying attention to every community in the province and not just to some communities on the island or on the mainland or in the interior. We're looking at the province as a whole, and we're trying to build a way for our province to thrive and everyone to thrive, whether you're in the north, south, the island. Doesn't matter for us as Greens under my leadership. We're going to be in your community, and we're going to be talking about a new vision for the province.
Okay, well, let's get into that vision a little bit. One of the things the Green Party's historically supported is proportional representation. But there's been some recent polling by Research Co. that suggests about 65% of the population is largely satisfied with first past the post. We've ran several referendums at this point on changing the election system. None of them succeeded. How do you reconcile pushing for electoral reform with kind of the several times expressed public sentiment that it's not a priority for people and they're kind of happy with the system as it is?
Yeah, I think proportional representation is an interesting issue because it is only when come election time it becomes a significantly important issue. And then people forget about it and we move in and we focus on other issues and then we come back to it every 4 years. And as leader, I would push for a citizens' assembly to give us a direction so that we can implement it through the legislature and test trial it. And if people oppose it, we can reverse that in the future. But I think, we've seen in the past versions of BCSTV got more than 50% in referendums. And the bar was set artificially higher than it needed to be, artificially higher than any other test for anything in the province, including how we elect our government. And I personally support PR. And I think that especially with the way the world is headed, people need more tools to feel represented by their government. There needs to be more engagement. And PR is the first step towards that, in my opinion. And so as leader, we'll continue to push for PR because it isn't just so changing the voting system. It's about ensuring that everyone in BC has representation. There's a lot of sentiment up north, where part of my family's from, that they don't get any attention from government at all. And PR will help to change that. It'll help to be more equally distribute balances of power, but also give people more tools to interact with their democracy.
Okay. On the housing front, the BC NDP's made some fairly significant moves, particularly with respect to forcing municipalities to change how they approach housing with various policies, the Housing Supply Act, the requirements for transit-oriented development, and all that. Do you support the provincially mandated upzoning, and would you do anything different than they've been doing?
Yeah, I support it in principle, but the way it was executed was an extreme burden to the municipalities. There was no new infrastructure funding supplied to them. There was no coordination or notice put out. It was a unilateral decision the government made. and that municipalities have to live with that decision. And as someone who has studied urban planning, I love the idea of urbanizing our urban areas. Um, but I think that the municipalities need to be supported and treated as fair partners in this process, something that at least I have heard that they don't feel that they were treated or consulted properly, and they don't have the money to upgrade their base infrastructure systems to meet the demand. If in 5 to 10 years from now we see large redevelopments across, even in the Lower Mainland, is where I speak from experience on talking about these issues. But that goes for everywhere in the province. It's affected by the new zoning laws. So I would like to revisit them and ensure that municipalities have the supports to accommodate growing populations. It's something we've already seen the province begin to struggle with as well, a population that's growing more and more, and we need to be there for municipalities to ensure that they can support those costs.
So, in principle, supportive, but would like to see more infrastructure money attached?
Yes, yeah, I would say I support urbanizing our urban communities, but we need to do that with municipalities as partners, with Indigenous nations as partners, and not just a unilateral. We're doing this now, and everyone else can deal with the wreckage.
Do you, do you think it's necessarily the case that all the municipalities are only kind of unsure about it because of the infrastructure aspect of it? I mean, the ones we've seen that the province has had to take the firmest hand with are Oak Bay and West Vancouver, both kind of fairly wealthy and exclusive areas that aren't, short on accessible resources if they really wanted to it. And it's more kind of a cultural thing or a local character thing they're looking for. How do you see the role for the province to take a firm hand on those ones where it's not necessarily the infrastructure that's causing the friction?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult position for the province to be in, but if you're going to live in an urban community, you need to be prepared for the impacts of that. And that means that it's no longer sustainable for us to support these small groups of very wealthy people having large amounts of land within our urban areas when we are already pricing out significant chunks of the population from these communities. And by all means, I understand there's frustration there, but we have a limited supply of land in the province, a limited supply of space, and a housing crisis that needs to be resolved. And we cannot continually keep expanding our cities into farmland in an effort to protect communities with half-acre lawns.
Changing gears slightly, do you support returning to carbon tax, and do you have any views on kind of the difference between a industrial focused one versus a consumer facing one?
Yeah, I don't support going back to the old model of the carbon tax, but I do believe that pricing pollution is a very effective tool in battling climate change, and figuring out how to do that effectively so we don't hamper individuals' wallets, but we actually catch those corporations who are doing the majority of polluting is going to be something that I want to sit down and look at how we can do effectively, because the carbon tax, if nothing less, created a lot of frustration with between British Columbians and the environmental protection movement. And that was not the goal, I don't believe, of the original carbon tax. And so figuring out how to work it in a way where it can actually improve the lives of 99% of people who are putting out an average amount of carbon emissions. If you are putting out a large amount, you have a extensive lifestyle that is causing you to pollute. Maybe you get dinged by that. You fly your private plane somewhere. But the majority of British Columbians, I think, can benefit from a pollution pricing program. Uh, and we saw that through the carbon rebates, and I want to see looking at that and how we can combine both of them to make them the best tool for British Columbians to help us reduce our carbon emissions.
You mentioned not relying on fossil fuels. I believe parts of your website's platform talk about decreasing the output on those and winding down those industries. Is there any particular industry you see replacing those in the economic landscape of the province?
Yeah, I think that shifting over large chunks of those folks who work in these current industries into renewables is going to be where we really shine. There's a lot of crossover in the skills trade. There will be retooling and retraining, but we're going to need people who have hands-on experience doing things like welding and metal fabrication, and that's what a lot of these people have skills and expertise in. And to that as well, the Greens have committed to, and I will commit to, ensuring that every worker who is impacted by this transition process not only has access to re-education programs and the ability to access income while they're training and ensure that their families are supported throughout the process. But I want to excite people to leave the oil and gas industry for something better, to offer a better promise than going out and slugging it and getting some oil money in your bank account so your family can be comfortable. I want long-term, sustainable, safe jobs with pensions and unions that people can rely on as they get older.
Related to the change in economy and whatnot, the province recently passed bills 14 and 15. 14 being focused on renewable energy, and 15 being more of a general anti-project bit of legislation, but basically to speed up processes, let the government designate certain projects as essential, and move through a more speedier approval process. Do you, in general, see a benefit to allowing certain projects that are in the provincial interest to have an accelerated approval process and whatnot, particularly with Bill 14, which is very renewables focused? If we are in a climate crisis, is there not a role to make sure there is no procedural barrier in the way to actually building out the renewable energy that's needed?
Yeah, I understand what the government was trying to do with bills 14 and 15. And there is something to be said that there is a lot of red tape when it comes to building, constructing things within the province. Entirely eliminating or removing processes is not the direction. I would say we need to review the process and come up with a more modern solution to that. One that could involve layering approval processes over top of each other, so that companies have the ability to move quicker within our system. But I don't think that should be done by eliminating regulations. I think that comes with reviewing regulations and figuring out how we can make the whole process more efficient.
You've mentioned a couple times in the interview so far, and as well on your website, about holding the NDP to account on a few different matters, just both generally, and there were a few specific ones mentioned in your platform section. How do you see the role for the BC Greens to hold them to account? Like, what does that look like in practice?
Yeah, I think that it comes down to two things. One, the NDP backtracks a lot on what they say they're going to do during the election, and ensuring that they actually follow through with the commitments they make during an election is important. And the position the Greens are in right now, we have been holding them to account on policy areas, and you can see that through Carga. The second one is holding them accountable. It may not be the correct term, but ensuring that Greens and Green voices and policies are represented in what the government is doing. And that's holding them accountable to our members, so that when we make a deal with the NDP, they follow through with it. And they don't back out, and they don't say they're going to do things and then don't. It is ensuring that they actually meet our agreements. And that's something that I think the new cargo bill has been more intentionally designed around, targets deadlines, reports, versus the last deal we had with the NDP, which was much more open-ended. Because we know from our past experiences that they don't always want to cooperate.
Finally, is there anything else you'd like to add? Any topic we didn't hit on that you think would be important? And also, if people are interested, where should they go to find out more?
Yeah, I'll say so. To go find out more, my website, adamba.ca. That will be more information about me, donations, emails, if you want to get in contact. And to communicate, to just say that if you feel burdened in this province, that is why I am running. I've been a server and a student, don't have loads of income. I feel pressured out of the province by the housing crisis and the cost of living crisis. I am running this race because I want to design a province that is better for people, and nothing else. And if that inspires you, if you see yourself as someone in the province who issues around cost of living are being ignored, or concerns about climate change are being ignored, come join our campaign, because that's what we're focused on. It isn't a big fancy show. It's simple, basic, issues-driven momentum.
Okay, Adam, thanks for joining me tonight.
Thank you very much for having me, Scott. It was a pleasure to be here.
Joining me tonight is Jonathan Kerr. Jonathan, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. So we've been talking with all the other Dream Party candidates, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. Yeah, so I'm Jonathan Kerr. I'm a family doctor up here in Comox, and I've been a family doctor for the last 17 years. And yeah, I ran for municipal politics when I kind of saw that our environment and the healthcare system were failing. And yeah, I ran as a Green here, and I won. I got elected to city council, and then I got reelected with the highest number of votes. And since then, I've also been serving as a regional director, and also I'm a biathlon coach, father of two teenagers. Yeah, so lots going on in my life. But I thought, yeah, let's go and try something else. That's going to be lots of fun, and see if I can bring the success that we've had here in Comox to the rest of the province.
And what does that success look like to you?
Yeah, so when I ran for election here in Comox, I did a listening campaign. I knocked on 3,000 doors, stood out in front of the grocery store, and with a sticker board, and asked people to vote on what issues were mattering most to them at that time. And the common stuff: affordable housing, the environment. Oh, by the way, I need a family doctor. And then I got to work on those things. So I started a task force, and we've recruited 45 family doctors and nurse practitioners in the last 3 years here in Comox. At the regional district, as vice chair, I've been championing a new housing authority to build more below market rental housing. And then, on the environment front, I've partnered with local biologists. We just stopped the bulldozing of a wetland earlier this year. So, what we see here in Comox is if you elect Greens, they get things done. And like our two MLAs, Rob and Jeremy, in the legislature, the work that they've done with the negotiation with the government to get more community health centers, Democratic Reform Committee, protection for renters, and a clean BC review. When you elect Greens, you get things done, and I want to make sure that we take that message all across BC.
So what's been the biggest difference going from local campaign, local elections to running for something province-wide?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest difference between being an elected official here in Comox and and being a leadership candidate on a province-wide is definitely the travel. I've been to 21 communities in the last 3.5 weeks, all the way up to Prince George, Quesnel, Williams Lake, out to the Kootenays and Nelson and Caslow, Kamloops, Kelowna, and a whole bunch of the Gulf Islands. So Victoria, Vancouver, of course, as well. And it's been a lot of travel, but it's been great because I've been meeting Greens in all of these communities, talking about things like housing and healthcare and the economy and affordability, and really, really focusing on those issues that are really similar to here. So the issues are the same all over the province, but it's just the amount of travel and time on the road has been the big difference. I think you might be muted there.
So what do you see as the primary role for the Dream Party in the current moment in BC? How does it fit in with where the other parties are and what's going on in the world right now?
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time for the BC Greens. As we see the backtracking on climate that from the EB's government. A lot of people thought Premier EB would be a real climate hero, and what we've seen is, he's backtracked on environmental regulations with bills 14 and 15. Taking away, the reconciliation and partnerships with First Nations. Announcing new fracking projects just a couple of weeks ago, and then really, being kind of permissive on this pipeline thing that we're seeing up north. I really think that those environmental voters are going to come home to the Greens, and we always have had the environment and climate change at our core. But I think what's really going to separate us, especially if I'm leader in going into the next election, is our focus on these other issues that are top of mind. We know the top issues on the mind of British Columbians right now are things like cost of living and housing affordability and healthcare. And those things are, like I mentioned before, are topics that I have some credibility with, that I've been working on in my community. And I think having a leader that's a physician, that's an elected official with some elected experience, and able to come and debate those issues with the Premier, I think that'll be really important for our party, and really show that we have some credibility, show that we're a serious professional party heading into the next election.
So on the serious professional party bit, one of the things I've noticed that a lot of third parties tend to struggle with is kind of a view of what they want to be. Are they ultimately trying to win power and displace one of the main other parties, or are they more there to stick up for a particular point of view, make sure certain issues get talked about, even if it doesn't necessarily register or grab the interest of, say, the 45-ish% of the province, you would need to actually get elected as premier. What do you see as, or how do you navigate kind of those tensions and the push and pull that those two potential directions would lead?
Yeah, I think as Greens, we're collaborators by nature, and we love to get in there and just roll up our sleeves and with collegiality and collaboration in mind, get things done for the people of British Columbia. We saw that with the agreement, in 2017, the Supply and Confidence Agreement, and we saw it just recently last year with the CARGA, the Cooperation and Responsible Government Agreement between the Greens and the NDP government, and that has really brought tangible results to British Columbians. More community health centers and protection for renters. And those things are really amazing to be able to do, even as a smaller party. So I would love, going into the next election, for us to elect more than two, hopefully, 6, 8, 10, 12 Green MLAs, hold the balance of power, work with the government to bring in great policies. It's really about the people of British Columbia, not about me, not about us or the party. It's about what can we do best for British Columbians. And we know when Greens are at the table, we get things done and we deliver. And that's what would be the best for the province and for our party.
So longer term, past this next election, would you be interested in trying to build the Green Party up into one that can really compete for power, or is it still more that kind of coalitional aspect you see as the main focus?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, we're going to have proportional representation sometime in my lifetime and your lifetime, and we'll see the Greens as part of a coalition government going forward. And whether we're at the leading end of that or a supporting partner, I think that's okay. I think Greens, we really do love collaborating and also never compromising on our values, the 6 core values as Greens that are shared by Greens all over the world, but also on our, the way we approach things, the Green elected officials. We have a certain decorum, a certain way of interacting with others. We like to work with others and make sure that the best policies are in place. And I think that's really what we've seen the success when we've had, professional elected officials run as Greens, get elected to the legislature, and then bring positive results for British Columbians. That's kind of the great thing about our party. And being in that, let's say we have proportional representation and people are free to vote their conscience, vote their values, vote how they want to. We'll see that Green vote share go up because there'll be less strategic voting, of course. And it'll be really exciting to see how many seats we'd really have in BC. I'm quite optimistic it'd be a pretty high number.
Yeah, on that proportional representation issue, there was a recent poll by Main Street that's put the percentage of the population that's largely satisfied with first past the post around 65%, been a couple of referendums in the past on the issue, and none of them passed, with the asterisks on the one that got 59%, I believe, and back in, I want to say 2006 on that, and didn't quite clear the threshold. But overall, the general indication of British Columbians seems to be in the direction of largely being satisfied with the system as is. How do you reconcile pushing for electoral reform when the population might not be with you as much on that?
Well, I would disagree completely. I don't think people are happy at all. As I travel the province, I talk to people that, whether you're conservative in Victoria that usually runs progressive, or a progressive up in the north that usually runs conservative, your vote feels like your vote hasn't mattered in decades. People are really frustrated about this. That poll that you're talking about, the 65%, is a very leading question, and you can with certain ways of asking questions, you can lead the horse to water. So I think really what we've seen is that people have been exposed to both. Any countries that have tried first past the post or some form of proportional representation, the overwhelming majority prefer having their vote actually matter. Every person in Canada, every person in BC, when we have an election, their vote should matter and should go towards electing somebody. And we simply don't have that system now, and people are fed up with it, despite what that poll or some other little random polls show.
Okay, changing gears slightly, you'd mentioned affordability and the issues surrounding that. One of the big moves the province has done has been to require municipalities to meet certain housing policy outcomes and certain zoning requirements on that. Are you broadly supportive of the direction the province has gone on that, and would there be anything you'd do differently?
Yeah, well, I can speak to this quite a lot. As a Comox counselor, I live this every day, every meeting we're dealing with this. So this is Bill 44 you're talking about, which really gave like targets and or mandates to communities to supply more zoning for more housing. And there's a couple problems with it. Number one, we're seeing developers only wanting to build, luxury condos and single family homes in our community and many communities. What we actually really need is below market or, community housing options where people can actually afford to live in them because it's tied to their income. In our own community of 80,000 people here in the Comox Valley, we're missing 2,500 below market rental housing units. And that is just a travesty because they haven't been built. The developers aren't building those. So we need to focus on that. And that's one of the reasons why I was an advocate for bringing a housing authority here, because we're going to be focusing on that target below market rental housing. What we're also seeing, though, is that this Bill 44, it's saying, yeah, go out and build more housing communities, but there's not the money for the infrastructure that we need. Roads, a new fire hall, bigger community centers, more recreation facilities, more sewer and water pipes in the ground. So where's that money going to come from? Well, that's going to be taxed, to the municipality residents, and we already know that they're taxed too high. So, and finally, removing the environmental regulations, removing the fact that public hearings are no longer permitted. These are just things that go backwards against our democracy, tenor. So I really think that, yes, it's great. We're trying to get more housing, but, overstepping democracy, overstepping environmental regulations, overlooking the fact that we don't have the money for infrastructure. It's all just kind of too much, too fast.
On the public hearing aspect on that, I've been to a few of those in Vancouver, and my experience on that is it tends to be a little unrepresentative of the broader public. The few people who show up, the people who, in a year or two's time will be living in those homes, they don't know who they are and can't show up to speak for themselves on that part. Do you think there's a better way to do that actually is representative, or in your opinion, is the public hearing process sufficiently representative?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably better ways to do it, but having no way to do it is definitely worse. I mean, just using that example before, so we had a piece of property that was up for development here in Comox. The developer came with some plans, and a couple of local biologists came to us and said, no, you can't build there. There's 2 red listed wetlands on that property. And I walked the area with them, and I saw it from my own 2 eyes. The developer had an RP bio who gave a report that said, oh, there's no wetland there. But of course, when we appealed to the provincial, we had a provincial biologist have a look at it. They said, yeah, of course, those are red listed wetlands. You can't build there. So they said that part of the forest, the southern tip of that forest, it couldn't be developed. And I think that was all because of a democratic process where local citizens could speak up at a public hearing, could bring something to light that maybe we didn't know at council or even the developer didn't know. And therefore, a better process was made where we saved that protected area. So I think we definitely need some kind of a public hearing of some kind, whether it's changed from the way it's been done in the past. I'm sure there's better ways to do it. I'd look to other communities and maybe other jurisdictions. But yeah, I think it's a really important thing to include democracy as part of our development of municipalities.
Okay. Switching gears again slightly to the environment. One of the questions we've been asking everyone is just what are their views on the carbon tax and do they support? But I was looking through your website, and you have a section on supporting low carbon choices where families can get credit based off how much emissions their household produces. Could you kind of walk us through that a little bit, and how do you kind of see the actual administration of that? The thing I'm a little curious about is how will a family be able to demonstrate, or how will millions of families across the province be able to collect all that information and have the government make an assessment on that.
Yeah, so this is really important. So when we talk about climate change and the environment, we have to make things affordable. Not everyone can afford to put a heat pump in or change their windows to energy efficient ones or get a solar, array on their rooftop. So we need to like double, triple, maybe even higher the rebates provided so that everyone can afford this. But what we can do certainly is reward families that are emitting fewer than, X number of tons of CO2 per year. And that number, I said 3 tons. It can be debated what the exact number is. If you do that, then you get some money back. You get $1,000 low carbon living credit. And by doing that, we can encourage people to live low carbon lifestyles, and those that are doing it will actually be rewarded for doing so. We can't just say, yes, we want to fix climate change. Yes, we want to protect our environment. We actually have to make that possible for British Columbians. And so that's one way to do it. We know already you can measure the R values of your homes. You can measure the electricity use, the gas use if you're using gas. I mean, there's easy ways to actually just calculate this, and based on a family of 4 or a family of 3 or however many people are in the house, what's your carbon level compared to your neighbor, carbon use level compared to your neighbor. So I think the thing we just need to really think about is how do we make moving to a cleaner, greener economy? How do we do that in a practical way? And it's by making it affordable for British Columbians.
Somewhat relatedly, you've talked about phasing out some fossil fuel oriented parts of the economy. And what do you see as kind of what would replace that? What's the vision for the economy in the future?
Oh, that's such a good question. I'm so glad you asked it, because I think this is one of the most important things about my platform is we can make British Columbia into a clean energy powerhouse where we have abundant, clean electrical energy, and we're going to be attracting business, attracting industries, new industries that we probably haven't even heard of yet to our province. If I have a patient, he's in his 30s, he lives in Comox, he works in the oil sands. He leaves every 2 weeks, leaves his wife and kids, flies to Alberta, works there, and comes back. And it's a great paying job. But he would love to work here. And I saw him in the office a couple of months ago, and he's like, I just hate all this travel. He would just love to be able to be here with a job that pays well. And if we had a clean tech, clean energy sector here that provided those jobs, he and others could live in BC, work in BC, and we'd have a stronger economy because of it. If you look at the just straight numbers of it, if you invest in oil and gas right now, right today, and you create one job, you invest that same amount of money in clean tech or clean energy, it creates 3.4 jobs. The same pay, more jobs, that's how we grow our economy in a clean tech, clean energy sector. And we need to move away from dying industries that are making our climate change worse and making our environment worse. And in terms of fracking, making the health of those that live around those fracking wells worse. By doing that, we're going to be able to have a better economy and a cleaner environment and good paying jobs for our workers here all over BC.
Well, one of the things that clean energy will need to go through as it gets built out is the permit and approvals process. Earlier this year, the government passed Bill 14 that was specifically focused on renewables, as well as Bill 15 that was a much more generalized, we kind of think this project's in the provincial interest. And both of those were ostensibly there to help speed up approvals, reduce the barriers to deploying various projects, particularly on Bill 14. Do you see there's a role for speeding that up? If we really are in a climate crisis, is there not a point to making sure that we build that stuff out as quickly as possible so that we aren't just being stuck with the existing, much more fossil fuel-oriented infrastructure that we've inherited?
We definitely need to increase rapidly the expansion of clean energy projects. Absolutely. However, it doesn't mean we need to put environmental regulations on the back burner, and it doesn't mean we need to stop consulting with First Nations. First Nations and reconciliation is something that was overlooked in both Bill 14 and 15. And in my platform, as you probably saw, I'm calling for we mandate at least 50% ownership by First Nations of any large-scale renewable projects. let's make economic prosperity possible for these First Nations without having to go and cut down all the forests and use oil and gas projects to make it. Let's have clean energy be the backbone to their economic prosperity. And I think that's what really excites me about this vision that I have for BC is, marrying that economic prosperity with environmental protection. So yes to more renewable projects, but we need to involve First Nations as equal partners, and we need to make sure that we don't sidestep other environmental regulations that might be holding a project up for good reason.
Do you think there's ever a trade-off on that where there's, perhaps we're focusing very much on the local aspect, and if the climate continues to degrade, we're maybe not making a good trade-off there, or is there not really as much of a trade-off in your view?
Something I learned quickly as I joined Comox Council was that there's always trade-offs, right? Absolutely. So you want more housing and more density, but then, there's more traffic. And so there's always these trade-offs. So yes, absolutely. But in the end, we can't go back on DRIP, right? We can't go back on the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, DRIPA. These are things that are like absolutely paramount to how we should act as local governments, provincial governments, and of course the federal government. So there's trade-offs, but there's fine lines as well that you can't cross. And I think when it comes to, especially our relationships with First Nations all across BC, that's a non-starter for me.
Okay. Finally, is there anything else we didn't talk about tonight that you think would be important to add? And if people are interested in finding out more, where should they go?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having a look at my platform. It's pretty obvious that you've read it chapter and verse. And anyone else that's interested, I really do believe that platforms are consultative, collaborative processes. As I'm traveling the province, I'm asking people to give me their feedback. So if you go to jonathankerr4bc.com, I'd love you to have a look at my platform, send me an email, and I'd love to hear your feedback, and I'll get in touch.
Great. Jonathan, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And that has been Politicos. Find links to everything we talked about at politicos.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicos. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicos is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.